name is Colin Berry. Have you ever visited a lumber yard like this one with your mom or your dad? They may have been looking for some 2x4s like these, or maybe some plywood or some fence posts. We all know they come from trees, but have you ever been out in the forest to see what is done to a tree to make it into a board? I thought it'd be neat for a kid like myself to find out. My dad owns a video production company, so I borrowed his video crew and asked Mr. McGuire, my dad's friend, to take me out for a day in the forest. The first thing I found out was that twice a year, Mr. McGuire provides a tour for teachers and takes them out into the forest so they can learn the kind of stuff we're going to learn today. I wanted to know why kids aren't taken on the tour too.
Well, that's a good question, but I think probably one of the reasons is because there are just so many kids. And also, you know, by taking the teachers out into the forest and giving them an opportunity to look at the trees and to find out about what happens out in the forest, then they can come back and they can talk to the students and they can tell you. In fact, this video that we're doing today should really help, don't you think? You know, in fact, all of the teachers aren't even going to get to see everything that we have on this video, because we take different trips at different times of the year, and so the teachers who take those trips will see different things on the days that they go. So you're probably going to see more today than most of the teachers get to see.
As we started up into the hills, I saw some trees growing along the side of the road. Are these the kind of trees we'll see at the lumber stores?
Well, no, in fact, that's why I stopped here. This area of the forest, or the mountains, is called a chaparral. And I think we'll get out here and take a look at some trees, one of which we see growing in this area, but it's not really a lumber tree. So why don't we get out of the car and take a look, all right? The trees that we're seeing right here with the dark green leaves, those are oak trees, just like the ones that grow down in the valley and like in Bidwell Park and places like that. On our day in the forest tours, we'll basically be looking at 4 trees that grow in our forest and that are pretty popular and pretty well known. The first one, and the one of probably major importance for lumbering and for the economy, is a ponderosa pine. We'll be taking a look at that closer up later on so that you can identify it. There is a family called the fir trees, and actually there's Douglas fir and white fir and red fir, but I think if you just remember fir, that'll be a lot easier and we won't need to get into all the technicalities of which one is which. Also the cedar tree, although it's not a real significant tree in terms of the economy, many people are familiar with the cedar tree because of the odor of the wood, and also because the wood is used in a lot of decorative work around houses, fences, and that kind of thing. And the other tree, of course, is the sugar pine, which a lot of people are familiar with primarily because of the beautiful long cones that hang from the tree during most of the season. And we'll be taking a closer look at all of those trees as we go on our trip on a day in the forest. One of the things you'll notice as we move up into the lower foothills out of the valley and we move toward the pine belt is we are in the chaparral now, or in the lower foothill zone. One of the trees that's very abundant and growing all around us, one of the conifers, is a tree that for a while was called a digger pine. A lot of people recognize that name. One of the reasons it was called a digger pine was because the people often saw groups of Indians digging around the base of the tree looking for roots and also possibly looking for the pine nuts that come out of the cone. The more proper term now for the tree is called a gray pine, and as you notice, it kind of has a gray tint to it. Really interesting because the gray pine has a huge cone, not as big as the cone of the sugar pine. It's very prickly. You can see very thorny, and it's a very dense cone. It does not open up as much as the cone of the sugar pine or the cone of the ponderosa. It's very, very sharp prickles on the end of each one of the little bracts on here. The wonderful thing about it is that the squirrels later on, they will strip that cone down so that there's nothing left of it but just the core, primarily because they're looking for the nuts that are on the inside of the cone. Today I happened to find one that's green, just fell off of the tree probably a matter of hours ago, and you can see that it's not opened up yet. Once again, the animals, primarily the squirrels, will eventually strip every one of those bracts off, and it will be stripped down to the core like this one. The gray pine also, in terms of the needle formation, has 3 needles. Later on we'll be looking at a ponderosa pine, and one of the things that you will learn is that the ponderosa pine has 3 needles in a bundle. And what we're talking about is where the needles are attached at the base. You can see that there are 3 that grow out of that bundle. As you can see, we broke this cone open with a rock, and there on the inside of the cone you can see the developing pine nuts. And over here we have a nut. There's a nut with a hard shell. When you break that open, the shell open on the inside, there's the pine nut. Colleen, why don't you come on over and try a pine nut? I cracked some open here. See what you think. Actually, they have a pretty good flavor. They're kind of nutty tasting.
Pine nuts?
Yeah.
They're sweet.
Kind of sweet, aren't they? Have you ever had those in a salad or anything?
I don't think so.
Well, I tell you what, they're very delicious, but if you had to sit all day and pick them out of these pine cones and crack them open, it would be a laborious task. You'd have to work pretty hard.
I bet.
Yeah. Probably one of the most important trees in our area in the forest is the ponderosa pine. This is a nice example of a ponderosa right here. As you can see, it's a very large tree. It's probably one of the most important trees in terms of lumber. Ponderosa pine, sometimes called yellow pine, is used for construction of homes and buildings, and probably a very one of the most important trees that we have in the area. The bark of the ponderosa tree is very interesting. It's kind of a puzzle wood. The pieces of bark kind of join together, and a lot of people even recognize it by looking at the bark and calling it the puzzle wood or puzzle bark tree. Also, the needles are very different. It has needles in 3 bundles. The cone is very different. It's a smaller cone, as you can see, and it also is scattered all over the ground here. You can see cones everywhere. 2 more trees that grow in the forest in this area that are very familiar to a lot of people are the Douglas fir, which is this smaller tree right here with the lighter tipped branches on it that has a lot of new growth, and the white fir, which is this tree right here that has a flatter branching structure. Probably most people recognize these right away as the trees that are normally used for Christmas trees during the holiday season. And although they are used a lot decoratively, they are also good lumber trees, and the fir is used for building construction and for a variety of other purposes. The fir tree is pretty hardy in this area and seems to grow well. It provides a very, very good structure for animals and for the undergrowth of the forest. This is an example of the needle structure of the Douglas fir. As you can see, the needles pretty well grow all the way around the branching structure. And that's pretty commonly known as the Christmas tree. This is the needle structure for the white fir, and as you can see, most of the needles on the branching structure point up and out. There are very few needles on the bottom side, such as the Douglas fir. Another economically viable tree found in our area is the cedar. That's the tree right here behind me with dark green foliage. The cedar tree is found pretty well throughout the area. It is used primarily for decorative work in building. Cedar fences, cedar posts, other kinds of decorative work. It's not a real good lumber for building houses and that type of thing. It's recognized primarily by the needle structure, which is a flat structure that's kind of shaped like the palm of your hand. Instead of being round, long needles, they're flat and they come out in a layered look, as you can probably tell by looking at the tree. Also, the bark is unique in that it has long kind of scratches in it, and it's a real rough looking bark. It looks like it would be kind of easy to peel off. And so the cedar tree is not only easy to recognize, it also has that recognizable smell, the smell of cedar. Many years ago, people cherished furniture made from cedar, particularly cedar chests, and people like to have their closets lined with cedar because it keeps a good smell in the closet and also is supposedly keeps insects out of your clothes. Another very important tree to our area is the sugar pine. And this right here beside us is a very, very large sugar pine. As you can see, the needles are more dense. It also has that puzzle bark pattern. And a lot of people like to find the pieces of bark like I have here and break the little pieces apart and see what kind of a puzzle pattern you can find. You can also see the huge pine cones hanging from the tree, and a lot of people like that like to use those at Christmas time for Christmas decorations and so forth. A little trick you might learn is, if you remember there are 5 needles in a bundle and there are 5 letters in sugar, S-U-G-A-R, then you can remember that there are 5 needles in a needle bundle for sugar pine. So the sugar pine is one of our most used trees in the forest. It's cut for timber, just like the ponderosa pine or yellow pine, and used for all kinds of building and construction. Well, Colleen, do you think that you can identify the 4 major trees of the forest by now?
I think so. I guess I could give it a try.
Well, I tell you, I think you're going to be able to identify them. And also, when you get back to the classroom, your teachers are going to have some worksheets that you'll be able to look at, and that will help you to learn to identify them. And also, they're going to have a copy of a video that you'll be able to see the trees and take a look at how to identify them and some other things like that. What do you think?
Sounds neat.
You had a good time?
Yeah.
Great. Well, you know what? I have another surprise for you that I think you're really going to like. So why don't we get in the car?
Mr. McGuire wanted us to see a logging operation, so we headed off to a little town way up past Doryville called Strawberry Valley. Strawberry Valley is the home of the Soper Wheeler Lumber Company. We were introduced to Mr. Paul Violet. Mr. Violet is a forester for the Soper Wheeler Company, and he told us that he had some loggers out cutting trees in the forest, so off we went. The loggers start their day very early in the morning, so at noon when we arrived, they were just cutting their last tree for the day. It was a big one, about 4 feet in diameter. The loggers had started when we arrived, but I found out later that they had already decided where they wanted the tree to fall. The loggers also told me that if I were to place a pine cone on the ground anywhere near the tree, they could drop the tree right on the pine cone. That is how good these loggers are. First, the loggers make a wedge cut on the side of the tree in the direction they wanted it to fall when the final cut was made. Next, they knock the wedge out and then cut the rest of the tree in half. They pound a plastic wedge into the tree to get it to lean in the direction they want it to fall. The camera crew set the camera on a tripod and left it running, and we all got behind a tree for safety. Even the loggers ran and yelled, "Timber!" You may have heard the old question, does a tree make a sound if it falls in the forest and no one is around to hear it? Well, I can tell you that when this tree hit the ground, you could hear it. The ground shook, and it sounded like thunder. I have no doubt that if no one had been around, this tree would have made plenty of noise. Next, the loggers cut off the branches and cut the tree again so that it would fit on a log truck. As we were heading back up the road, a tractor known as a skidder came down the road. Mr. Violet explained that the skidder driver either picks up a log with the 2 hook-like things on the back, or he ties a steel cable around them and fastens them with a device called the choker. Then he hauls them off to a location where they can be loaded onto a log truck. That area is called the landing. and the landing was our next destination. Mr. Violet explained that the landing is a very dangerous place. The skidders are bringing in the logs, and these loggers are cutting off all the remaining branches. Besides that, the loader operator was moving logs around. The loader was by far my favorite. It really looked like a transformer. I expected it to change right before my eyes at any time. We were in luck because a log truck pulled in while we were there. Mr. Violet explained that when a log truck pulls in, the crew at the landing work really hard to get it loaded and on the road as fast as they can. A log truck driver picks up between 2 and 4 loads of logs a day, so they want to get back on the road as fast as they can. Have any of you ever seen a log truck going down the road with its trailer on the top like this? Now you're going to see how they take it off. I'd like to see that again. The loader loaded 2 big logs first, and then a smaller log in the middle. These 3 logs made a good base for the logs that would be loaded on top. This truck had a built-in scale, and the driver showed me how they have to balance the logs evenly between the truck and the trailer. The total weight this truck can carry is 80,000 pounds. That's a lot. Whoa, what happened here? Looks like a big lawnmower came through here.
Well, sort of, Colleen. What we had come through here is a machine called a slash buster. That's what we're here to see. I don't know if you can hear that. It's coming this way. The reason we brought it through here was to knock down the competing brush and thin the trees at the same time. And we're reducing that competitive stress on these trees.
It was only 1 o'clock, but the day was over for the loggers. As we were walking back, I noticed there were still many trees that hadn't been cut down. I asked Mr. Violet why they didn't cut them all down.
This stand of trees that I've just walked out of has been felled in a thinning prescription. That means we've removed some of the trees with the intent of improving the growth on the trees that we've left behind. We've selected trees that have good, healthy, live crowns and taken those that were less healthy, the ones that were suppressed. This sugar pine will respond very well to this thinning. It has a good, healthy crown, and will utilize the space that we've provided it by removing its less healthy neighbors.
One of the trees had been broken off by the wind near the top, and I could tell it was dead. The loggers had left it standing. Mr. Violet said it was a snag. I asked him why it was left standing.
It's been recognized that dead trees provide valuable habitat for wildlife species, particularly birds and some mammals. And in recent logging practices, foresters and forest managers have worked hard at protecting snags in their logging operations. This is a case where you've seen we felled trees and the snag hasn't been damaged. And after skidding, in the skidding process of these logs, we'll try to protect this snag, and it'll be retained for those wildlife values.
I asked Mr. Violet, what are some of the animals you want to protect? He told me one of them was called the spotted owl. So I asked Mr. Violet if he had ever seen one. He said he's not only seen one, but he has one he feeds. You guessed it, I wanted to see him feed the spotted owl, and maybe I would get to feed it too. The best way to find a spotted owl is to hoot for him. Mr. Violet had hooted for this owl before, and so it was not hard to find him. The spotted owl has a special pattern to his hoot. Listen again. We decided to see if the owl would eat a mouse while we were watching. I put a mouse on a branch near where the owl was sitting. We didn't have to wait long. Almost immediately, the owl flew down, grabbed the mouse, and returned to his perch to eat him. The owl wasn't frightened of us at all. He flew down and caught several mice while we watched, only a few feet away. Because owls eat at night and sleep during the day, it wasn't long before he decided it was nap time and flew off to his favorite tree for the rest of the day. We also heard a talk by a ranger from the U.S. Forest Service. He told us that the U.S. Forest Service is not only responsible for providing campgrounds and taking care of our national parks, but they are also responsible for managing the forests. They sell logs to the lumber companies. They provide pasture lands for cattle and protect the plants and animals that live in the forest. Mr. McGuire told me about another lumber company called Collins Pine. They are located in the town of Chester, and they have a sawmill. So the next day, we drove up to Chester to the Collins Pine sawmill. There was a tour going on, so we joined in. These are the saw blades they use on the saw that cuts the logs into boards. They are stored in the blade sharpening room when they are not in use. I found out that they replace the blade every 6 hours, and each blade must be resharpened before they can be used again. Watch how fast this big saw cuts a board off of this big log. The board travels down a series of conveyor belts and rollers. A special camera divides the boards by size, and a computer tells the machinery called a J-bar where to store the boards. The boards are dried in a big storage shed, and then delivered to the lumberyard. So when your dad needs a board, he doesn't have to go cut down a tree to get one. He can get it at the lumberyard. Next time you're at a lumberyard, look at the 2x4s. Find out what kind of wood they are, and then see if you can remember what the trees look like. I really learned a lot, and I know you did too. I hope you enjoyed our day in the forest.